Special Forces operatives from the primary unit of the main intelligence directorate destroyed 2 radar stations and a launcher from an S-300 surface-to-air missile system in the Donetsk region. The intelligence officers shared footage of the special operation online. Ukrainian soldiers also eliminated a group of Russian troops and the truck they were traveling in. Meanwhile, drone operators from the prime unit of the 5th Border Detachment carried out precise strikes on the occupiers' logistics in the northern Slobozhenskaya direction. Specifically, they destroyed an enemy drone operator's position and neutralized one of their FPV drones. In addition, enemy passenger cars, tactical and cargo vehicles, as well as a quad bike used by Russian occupiers to deliver ammunition, were detected and disabled. At the same time, in the Kupiansk direction, the Russian army tried to push back the positions of Ukrainian units near Pishchain and Shaikalka. And in the Lyman sector, the aggressor attacked near Zelenskyy High, Novozalivka, and Drobyship. In the Pokrovsk section of the front, the invaders carried out assault operations near Novoekonomik, Rodinsk, Novopavlivka, Kotlyme, and Dakhny.
If we take Pokrovsk in a broad sense, well, it means the enemy was operating from the west to the north, cutting off this logistical route. From the south, southwest, and west, they entered the city, and from these directions, intense urban fighting is taking place. From the east, they are attacking from the direction of Myrnohrad, and Myrnohrad is essentially covering Pokrovsk from the east within this whole agglomeration. And as for the northeast, as is known, there was a capture of enemy forces there. The Ukrainian Defense Forces managed to find reserve. And for over a month now, they have split this encirclement into districts and sectors. They managed to surround and destroy the northern part over a stretch of 12 kilometers.
Russian troops had planned to capture Pokrovsk a year ago, but Ukrainian forces thwarted those plans, inflicting serious losses on the enemy. This was reported by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to him, Russia has concentrated massive forces in this direction, but still has not achieved its objectives. Zelenskyy noted that the Russians are trying to convince the world that Pokrovsk is completely captured, but this does not reflect reality. He also reported that in the first half of the year, Ukrainian forces captured 2,200 Russian soldiers in the east of the country, including in Dobropillia and Pokrovsk.
They have deployed so many troops to Pokrovsk that Ukraine simply can't allocate that many to a single direction. The ratio is 1:8. Just imagine how many Russian troops are there. But even so, they haven't achieved their planned result. They show maps with Pokrovsk captured, talk about how they're stationed in the Dnipropetrovsk region, how they've occupied 90% of eastern Ukraine. But that's a lie. The fact that we are holding Pokrovsk, and that they keep postponing their campaign plans, proves to the world that they're lying and that it's worth continuing to support Ukraine. All of the East, Dobropillia, Pokrovsk brought in 2,200 Russian prisoners. Just imagine how many they've lost. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, during a meeting with journalists.
Ukraine's defense forces have thwarted one of the most massive Russian offensives in recent times in the Dobropillia area. The enemy used about 30 armored vehicles. A distinctive feature of the attack was the increased number of Russian tanks, according to the 1st Corps of the Azov National Guard. The invaders tried to complicate the actions of the defense forces by moving equipment in small groups of 4 or 5 units along different routes and at different times. They were also counting on poor weather conditions, which make it harder for drones to operate. But despite this, Ukrainian defenders were able to repel the attack. As a result of a fierce battle that lasted more than 6 hours, the enemy lost 15 pieces of equipment, including 2 tanks and 12 armored fighting vehicles, and their infantry was eliminated by FPV drones. And the soldiers of the 33rd Mechanized Brigade stopped a Russian assault near Vladimirovka in the Donetsk region. The enemy sent at least 6 pieces of equipment with infantry into the village, but the attack was unsuccessful. The defense forces destroyed an APC and damaged another one. 6 invaders were eliminated. Another 6 were wounded. And in the temporarily occupied Crimea, there are reports of forced mobilization of recently discharged Russian conscripts. This concerns, in particular, servicemen who had a good record, but after demobilization refused to sign contracts again.
They want to involve as many people as possible, military personnel, that is, to maintain some kind of advantage in manpower at the front. So, again, we talked about reserve. More than 2 million. They have amended their legislation and are bringing in these people. Since there are now not enough recruits from the previous spring and fall drafts, their so-called mandatory service among the youth. So, they changed the law, and now the draft takes place throughout the entire year. In other words, so that there is a constant flow and it keeps happening.
1,150 Russian occupiers were eliminated on the front lines over the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have surpassed 1,139,000 people. In addition, according to the information you now see on your screens from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, yesterday the Defense Forces destroyed 4 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles, and 20 artillery systems. 1 multiple rocket launcher system was also burned, as well as 81 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment, and an IL-135.
A clash occurred on the front line over the past day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Defense Forces repelled 5 attacks by the Russian army in both the southern Slobozansky and Kupiansk directions. In the Sloviansk sector, the Russians stormed Ukrainian positions 6 times. In the Heliopol sector, and just as many in the Kharkiv sector, Lyman direction. There, the Ukrainian Armed Forces repelled 10 attacks by the occupiers and 17 in the Kostiantynivka sector, 18 in the Oleksandrivka sector, and the Pokrovsk direction remained the hottest spot on the front the day before. There, Russian units tried to break through the Ukrainian defenses 45 times. About the
situation, we are not talking. More to come. We have a guest joining us now, Mykola Malomuzh, General of the Ukrainian Army, head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine from 2005 to 2010. Mykola Malomuzh, welcome to the broadcast, and glory to Ukraine.
Good morning.
Greetings, glory to the heroes.
Mykola Malomuzh, I would like you to comment on the reports we've been receiving, from Western media outlets. Here, NBC News writes that U.S. intelligence agencies are not citing them, not referencing their data. They see no signs that Russia is ready to compromise on issues regarding Ukraine. Well, the leader of the Russian Federation, or more precisely, the Kremlin's Führer Putin, is now, more than ever before, determined to continue the war. Well, that's obvious, right? All this bravado, yeah, and they note that Putin is firmly set on winning on the battlefield. Well, what else would they report, right, if they're referencing some data? Nikolai Grigorievich, please give us your assessment. What message is he trying to send in this way? Putin, and accordingly, perhaps also the Western media outlets. Let's call it that.
First of all, Putin currently has no arguments to push his plan on various negotiation platforms at any level. Putin-Trump working groups, because the U.S. has taken a clear and tough stance. A clear plan for settlement has been announced by Trump to Putin. And accordingly, it has been agreed upon with President Zelenskyy and the European Union partners. Putin is not agreeing to this format because it would require systemic concessions, stopping the shelling of civilians, halting combat operations at the front, and, of course, making progress in several areas on the battlefield. That's why he believes that this format is a losing one for him. And now the only argument left is to demonstrate his strength. At the strategic level, this is a threat of nuclear weapons. Means including, so to speak, new ones. For example, missiles that have unlimited energy capabilities. Well, that's a nuclear reactor in flight. I would call it a little Chernobyl because it leaves a radioactive trail. And of course, it's an uncontrollable situation if it explodes on Russian territory or elsewhere. In other words, it's a threat to the world, especially since it's ineffective in combat and from a technological standpoint. But the threat is real. Then, the triad test he conducted a week ago is a threat of global proportions. And of course, it's necessary to specifically demonstrate that he has prospects on the battlefield. He told Trump that he would conquer Ukraine by force anyway. This was made clear because Trump even let it slip during a conversation with Zelenskyy, which made it to the press, that Putin specifically foresaw that he would destroy Ukraine. In other words, he will advance using his own means. And this confirms the thesis that there are no successes either in the geopolitical arena or in the specific negotiation process at the level of working groups and their envoys, who recently traveled to the United States. So he continues, of course, to launch strikes to show that he is achieving success on the front. And he tries to break the spirit of Ukrainians by attacking civilian targets, people, kindergartens, schools, and especially energy infrastructure. This is his current strategic plan. He is carrying it out. Of course, he can't do this across all sectors. For example, from the northern direction, from Sumy, Kursk, all the way to Kherson. That's why today he has launched 6 tactical offensive operations. But one of them, which he considers strategic, is, of course, the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The first component, he assumes, will be achieved through new forces. These are the airborne troops, the naval infantry, and the air assault forces. He has also brought in an additional 22,000 troops to Pokrovsk. He plans not only to enter with assault groups, but to encircle Pokrovsk from the north and south. And further, he believes this will create the conditions to encircle the city. And of course, to cut off Myrnohrad. And, as even our press service states, it confirms that the capture of Myrnohrad is on the outskirts. This is another plan, after capturing Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, to move further toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, seizing the entire Donetsk region. That's his current objective. To break through in this direction and control the entire Donetsk region. And then to continue offensive operations toward Oleksandrivka and the corresponding direction in Dnipropetrovsk region. In other words, he sees prospects for seizing new territories in a new region, as he believes, and of course, the Zaporizhia direction, which he will keep pressing constantly, trying to create more favorable conditions for shelling Zaporizhia and for gaining advantageous positions for fire. Constant strikes on infrastructure facilities in Zaporizhia and Zaporizhia region. So this is for the next approximately 2 to 3 weeks. But specifically for Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, there is a date. It's November 15th. That's why he set the task for this time frame. You saw it at the General Staff meeting, and all forces have been thrown there to carry out the aggressor's orders. I believe that at this moment, there is no prospect of achieving this, although the situation is difficult in the Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad directions. Here, the enemy is breaking into the city, entering individual streets, and of course, we need to deploy additional reserves to neutralize these advances, especially considering preparations for strikes from the flanks and rear. Our alternative actions should be aimed at destroying such groups as they approach. And of course, at the moment, when they enter individual sectors in this labyrinth.
Nikolai Grigorievich, I would also like to say a few words about the Kupiansk direction, where the situation is also quite tense. Right now, the situation is tense. The occupiers are breaking through. As I understand it, it's not Kupiansk itself, but Kupiansk-Kozlovoy that interests the occupiers' army right now, as a rather significant, let's call it, hub for supplying the Russian army. We see that, in fact, mainly, they transport all their cargo by rail. It's not just about speed, it's probably about the scale as well. A train echelon is quite a significant transport unit, capable of moving a lot of personnel and equipment at once. What is the situation there? And here, I'd also like to clarify the situation for our viewers. There has been a lot of talk about what's happening, including around the Belgorod Reservoir. As I understand it, this is also the case here. The whole story is connected to what might eventually happen in the Kharkiv direction, since the reservoir is located on the Stary Oskol River.
Well, we see that the enemy seems to have. The second main direction is Kupiansk. They have repeatedly concluded that Kupiansk is already completely captured and, on the other hand, surrounded by a fold and even the rear of the west. Here we are conducting both offensive and counteroffensive operations. Kupiansk itself. And, accordingly, we are delivering fire strikes on the line and strikes directly on the plateau. And this will allow us to neutralize them. The reserves that were being brought in both by rail and by other routes, like highways, where there were crossings, some of them were partially flooded or destroyed. So at the moment, the ability to bring in reserves has been weakened, and logistics have become even more complicated. And we are monitoring the battlefield directly. Of course, things are more complicated because of the water and the weather. So in this situation, the enemy can't effectively deploy large reserves or operate very efficiently in terms of advancing. On one hand, we're delivering artillery and drone strikes, and on the other, it's difficult to move along the front line. So there are objective indicators that the enemy is bogged down. But on the other hand, of course, it's also tough work for us there.
But right now, there aren't any tactical breakthroughs, despite what the enemy keeps reporting in their official channels. We're still controlling the situation with our firepower, and of course, we're carrying out specific special operations to neutralize this infiltration group. Because there, on the one hand, drones are operating, and accordingly, there are mobile groups, as we call them, to seize strongpoints, and a broader format of units trying to create a wider model of encirclement or semi-encirclement. But they're not succeeding, and with the kind of strikes we're delivering, we're still able to neutralize their additional reserves. This situation prevents them from launching offensive operations near Kupiansk, and it also thwarts all their plans to break through toward the Kharkiv direction overall.
Nikolai Grigorievich, could you please tell us if we're talking now about the implementation of a certain kind of nuclear blackmail, what the Kremlin handlers, and Vladimir Putin personally, are now trying to show the whole world? How effective do you think this position is, which, in fact, they've been sticking to for so many years, trying to scare the world with their nuclear club?
Well, I can say for sure now that Putin is playing with fire. He is already facing pushback not only from the United States, and Trump has warned him. We have the most powerful nuclear submarine off the coast of Russia. These aren't just words, it's a signal. But if we're talking about reality, all of Russia's silo-based nuclear assets, as well as all strategic bombers capable of carrying any type of nuclear warhead, and, of course, the sea-based ones on submarines patrolling the ocean. And, accordingly, the nuclear cruisers are under the control of the US, Britain, and France. This is in terms of deterrence. And if they start to deploy, that's a warning and possibly the delivery of a direct strike or a counterstrike. Instantly. Putin knows this, but he's trying to blackmail, saying, I think, that nuclear war threatens the world. But by doing so, he shows that he's ready to use such means, even if it means destroying the world. But neither the Americans nor the Europeans agree with this, nor do the Chinese, and Xi Jinping has repeatedly warned him not to use such means. And of course, not India either. It's a nuclear club, but not the whole world, because the scenario of a global nuclear war clearly shows the consequences, the destruction of humanity. That's why he'll keep making threats, playing on the edge, yes, but all these tests, these new things, these imperfect missiles that keep failing tests across Russia's territory, show that he's not capable. And now, not just through back channels, but directly, he's being warned. Such blackmail is unacceptable. And officially, and Xi Jinping, I assume, and Trump will also discuss this topic. Because for China, this is also a very sensitive issue, since, as I said before, Xi Jinping in Beijing and in Moscow, they've repeatedly told Putin not to allow any proliferation, any testing, and especially not the movement, like he's doing now in Belarus. In other words, he will violate, let's say, the agreements with his so-called partner or patron. So at this point, I think this will be another topic for global discussion, not just for Trump, Xi Jinping, but also for other countries in the global community. This, of course, will be a strong counteraction against Putin in terms of containment. And accordingly, I think this will also be a reason to launch a unified global peace initiative to put pressure on Russia. Because war is a trigger not only for advancing westward, for example, toward NATO countries and the European continent, so to speak. It is, of course, also an escalation of nuclear security concerns. This threatens global peace. I want to emphasize that once again, and accordingly, I think the leaders will already be focused on how to end this war and to put an end to the nuclear threat that is constantly being brandished by Putin and his closest circle. For example, Medvedev, who is threatening to strike Washington, New York, London, and Berlin. So, accordingly, there will be a response or preemptive strikes. This, of course, is an emergency situation for the world. I think such a scenario is unlikely, but in order to prevent it from happening, or at least to stop it from being used as blackmail, action is needed from all sides right now. Actions against Putin and, of course, for peace in Ukraine, which would resolve issues of global military tension.
Well, yes, so we'll keep an eye on the situation. Nikolai Grigorievich, thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You're always welcome here. Mykola Malomuzh, General of the Ukrainian Army, Head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine, from 2005 to 2010. Let me remind you, he was with us live. We discussed the situation at the front.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.